The homeless man and the time capsule. Regret or gratitude. An empty stomach made him throw away a lifetime opportunity, but the end wasn't something anyone expected. The cold wind swept through the empty churchyard as dawn slowly painted the sky with shades of gray. Curled up on a weathered wooden bench beneath an ancient oak tree lay a homeless man named Owen. His faded wool cap had long since lost its original color, and his threadbare coat offered little protection against the biting morning chill. Every day began the same way. He opened his eyes to the sound of church bells. He stretched his aching back. Then he quietly thanked God for another day. Most people hurried past him without a second glance. Some avoided eye contact altogether. Others pretended he wasn't there. Children often stared until their parents gently pulled them away. Yet Owen never complained. He simply smiled. "Good morning," he greeted everyone, whether they answered or not. Years of disappointment had taught him something that many wealthy people never learned. Kindness cost nothing. After folding the thin blanket he had rescued from a dumpster months earlier, Owen made his familiar walk toward the neighborhood soup kitchen. The volunteers greeted him warmly. "Morning, Owen," one of them said. "Morning," he replied with a grateful smile. He accepted a bowl of hot vegetable soup and sat quietly near the window. As steam rose from the bowl, he rubbed his hands together, allowing the warmth to chase away the cold. Outside, people hurried to work carrying briefcases, sipping expensive coffee, and talking into their phones. Everyone looked busy. Everyone had somewhere to be. Owen watched them silently. Years ago, he had once been just like them. He had worked construction on nearly every building in the neighborhood. He had dreamed of owning a small house, raising a family, and retiring with dignity. Life had chosen another path. A workplace accident had left him unable to work for months. The medical bill swallowed his savings. His wife became ill shortly afterward and passed away. Without steady income, the house was lost. Friends slowly disappeared. One setback became another, until everything he owned fit inside one worn backpack. Even so, bitterness never found a permanent home in Owen's heart. As he finished his soup, a colorful poster caught his attention outside the window. It had been taped to a nearby lamppost. The bold letters read, "Grand Lottery, $3 million, Jackpot." Owen chuckled softly. $3 million, he whispered. He looked down at the few coins resting in his palm. "I'd settle for enough to eat tomorrow." The wind loosened one corner of the poster until it fluttered wildly. When no one seemed interested, Owen walked outside, carefully removed the loose flyer, folded it neatly, and tucked it into his pocket. "You never know when a piece of paper might come in handy," he muttered. His stomach growled loudly. The smell of grilled onions drifted across the street from a small family restaurant. His mouth watered instantly. Inside the restaurant, workers laughed over breakfast, while fresh sandwiches disappeared from the display one after another. Owen stood quietly outside the window. He counted his money. $1, $2, $3. Not a single coin more, he sighed. The roast beef sandwich displayed near the counter looked delicious, perhaps too delicious. The restaurant owner, Mabel, noticed him standing outside. She had seen Owen around the neighborhood for years. Although he didn't always have much, and life was not easy, she admired how polite he remained. She stepped outside. "Morning, Owen," he smiled. "Morning, Mabel." "You hungry?" He nodded with a shy smile. "I've got exactly $3. She laughed gently. "Well, today's your lucky day." She pointed toward the sandwich. "I'll give you the roast beef sandwich and a cup of coffee if you've got the exact change." Owen's eyes lit up. For a brief moment, happiness returned to his face. As he reached into his coat pocket, his fingers brushed against something rough. It was an old lottery ticket he had found several days earlier. He had kept it simply because it felt too clean to throw away. Holding it up, he asked, "Do you think this thing is worth anything?" Mabel barely glanced at it before shrugging. "It probably expired already." She smiled. "I'll trade you the sandwich for it if you don't want it." Owen stared at the ticket. For several long seconds, he imagined impossible dreams. Maybe, just maybe. But reality quickly returned. Dreams couldn't fill an empty stomach. His hands trembled slightly as he looked from the ticket to the sandwich. One could be worthless. The other would keep him alive today. Finally, he smiled. "I'll take the sandwich." Mabel handed him the warm meal and steaming coffee. He placed the old lottery ticket into her hand without another thought. As Owen took his first bite, relief spread across his tired face. "It tastes better than hope," he whispered. Across the restaurant, a customer quietly watched the exchange. His name was Amos Price. A successful construction contractor with a habit of making impulsive purchases, Amos couldn't stop thinking about the strange trade he had just witnessed. After paying for breakfast, he walked toward the counter. "What are you going to do with that old ticket?" he asked Mabel. She laughed. "Probably throw it away." Amos grinned. "I'll give you $1 for it." She raised an eyebrow. "$1 for garbage?" "Why not?" Amos replied with a shrug. "You never know." Mabel laughed, accepted the dollar, and handed him the ticket. Amos folded it absent-mindedly and slipped it into his wallet. By the time he reached his truck, he'd already forgotten it was there. Little did anyone know. That forgotten piece of paper was about to change not only one man's life, but the destiny of an entire town. For nearly a week, life continued as if nothing unusual had happened. Owen returned to his familiar routine. Each morning he swept the church steps for a few coins from kind strangers. Each afternoon he wandered through the neighborhood, greeting people with the same warm smile. Each night he returned to his bench beneath the old oak tree. The sandwich Mabel had traded him was long gone. Only the memory of its warmth remained. Sometimes he wondered about the old lottery ticket. What if, he would whisper before shaking his head. No, he told himself. A full stomach was worth more than 1,000 impossible dreams. Meanwhile, Amos Price had buried himself in work. His construction company had just won a contract to renovate an aging warehouse on the edge of town, and his days were filled with meetings, blueprints, and phone calls. The old lottery ticket sat forgotten inside his wallet. One rainy Thursday evening, Amos stopped at a convenience store to buy coffee before driving home. As he reached for his credit card, the faded ticket slipped from his wallet and landed on the floor. He looked down. Oh, gosh, you're still here. He picked it up and smiled. I almost forgot about you. The cashier chuckled. Still chasing lottery dreams? Amos laughed. Not really. I only bought it because a homeless man traded it for a sandwich. The cashier shrugged. You should check it anyway. Amos looked at the faded numbers. It's probably expired. He almost dropped it into the trash can beside the counter. His hand hovered over the opening. Then he stopped. What have I got to lose? He folded the ticket once more and slipped it back into his pocket. That single decision changed everything. The next morning, while waiting for a meeting to begin, Amos downloaded the official lottery app onto his phone. Mostly out of curiosity, he scanned the barcode. The screen loaded for several long seconds. Nothing happened. He frowned. Figures. Just as he was about to close the app, his phone vibrated violently. A flashing message appeared across the screen. Please contact the lottery office immediately. Amos blinked. What? He refreshed the page. The same message appeared again. His heartbeat quickened, and another notification followed. Winning numbers matched. He stared at the screen. His mouth went dry. No. He checked the numbers himself, once, twice, 3 times. Every single number matched. His breathing became uneven. This can't be happening. He rushed outside, climbed into his truck, and drove straight to the lottery headquarters. Every traffic light felt unbearably slow. Every minute felt like an hour. When he finally handed the ticket to the lottery official, she examined it carefully before disappearing into a back office. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Amos sat alone, his palms sweating. Finally, the woman returned with 2 security officers. For one terrifying moment, Amos thought he had done something wrong. Instead, the woman smiled. Congratulations, Mr. Price. Her voice was calm. You are the sole winner of the $3 million jackpot. Amos couldn't speak. He simply stared. $3 million. His knees nearly gave way. Tears filled his eyes. Not because of the money, but because he remembered exactly where the ticket had come from. A homeless man, a sandwich, one small decision. As reporters flooded the lottery office the next day, cameras flashed from every direction. Microphones crowded around him. What are you going to buy? A mansion? A sports car? A private jet? Amos smiled politely. I already have a home. The reporters looked puzzled. I already have a car. Another pause. And I don't need a jet. So what will you do with $3 million? Amos fell silent. Images rushed through his mind. The abandoned theater where he had played as a child, the boarded-up shops, the broken sidewalks, the empty playground, the church bench where Owen slept every night. Then another memory surfaced. His father. Years earlier, his father had said something Amos never forgot. If you ever become wealthy, don't count your money. Count the lives you can change. Standing before dozens of cameras, Amos finally answered. I'm going home. The reporters exchanged confused glances. And then, Amos smiled. I'm going to rebuild the neighborhood that built me. Across town, Owen had no idea any of this had happened. He was helping an elderly woman carry groceries across the street. She reached into her purse. I'd like to give you something. Owen gently shook his head. You already gave me a smile. The woman walked away. She turned back. The world needs more people like you. Owen smiled quietly. If only the world believed that. Neither of them noticed the television inside the electronics store across the street. On every screen appeared the same breaking news headline. Local contractor wins $3 million. Lottery jackpot. The camera zoomed in on Amos. Then he said words that would soon spread across the entire town. I'm looking for the homeless man who unknowingly changed my life. Owen kept walking. He never heard a single word. He had no idea that someone was already searching for him. Take a moment to like and subscribe. Don't forget to turn on your notification bell to get more beautiful stories. By sunrise, the entire town was talking about one thing. The local contractor who had won $3 million. News stations replayed the interview every hour. Social media exploded with comments. Some praised Amos for promising to help the community. Others doubted his sincerity. Give him a month, one man scoffed inside a cafe. He'll be living on a private island. But Amos had no interest in luxury. Several days after claiming his prize, he drove back to Mabel's restaurant. The familiar bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. Mabel looked up from wiping the counter. Well, she laughed. Look who's famous. Amos smiled. I came to thank you. For what? For selling me the ticket. Mabel folded her arms. I only sold it because Owen traded it for a sandwich. The smile faded from Amos's face. Where is he? She sighed. I wish I knew. He usually sleeps by the church, but homeless people don't always stay in one place. Amos nodded slowly. I have to find him. For what? Because none of this belongs to me alone. That afternoon, Amos searched every street surrounding the church. He checked the soup kitchen, the public library, the old bus station, even the park where several homeless people gathered during the evenings. No one had seen Owen. Days passed. Every morning before work, Amos continued searching. Every evening, he searched again. Then, nearly a week later, he spotted a familiar figure sitting quietly beneath the old oak tree beside the church. Owen. He was feeding crumbs of stale bread to a flock of pigeons. Amos approached slowly. "Mind if I sit here?" Owen smiled. "Bench belongs to everyone." Amos sat beside him. For a moment, neither man spoke. Finally, Amos reached into his pocket and pulled out the old lottery ticket. Or rather, what was left of it. It had been sealed inside a protective plastic sleeve by the lottery office. Owen stared at it in confusion. "I thought I traded that away." "You did." "And?" Amos took a deep breath. "It won." Owen blinked. "Won?" "The jackpot." Silence. The pigeons fluttered into the air. A church bell echoed in the distance. Owen looked at Amos, waiting for him to laugh. He never did. "You mean $3 million?" Owen's eyes widened. His lips trembled. Then to Amos's surprise, he smiled. "Amazing." That was all he said. No anger, no regret, no bitterness. Amos couldn't believe it. "You're not upset?" Owen looked toward the church. "If I'd kept the ticket, I would have gone hungry that day." He chuckled softly. "I needed the sandwich more than I needed a dream." Amos felt tears forming in his eyes. "I've met wealthy people who complain about everything." He looked at Owen. "And I've met a homeless man who has nothing, yet still finds reasons to be grateful." Owen shrugged. Being bitter never fed anybody. For a long moment, Amos simply sat in silence. Then he made a promise. "I can't change your past." Owen nodded. "But maybe together." He looked across the broken neighborhood. "We can change someone else's future." Over the next several weeks, Amos quietly got to work. He hired architects, engineers, local builders, landscape designers. Instead of purchasing a mansion, he bought abandoned buildings that had become eyesores. The old neighborhood theater, the empty community center, the cracked basketball court, the neglected playground. People watched in disbelief. He's actually doing it. Dozens of unemployed workers suddenly had jobs again. Local hardware stores became busy. Restaurants filled with construction crews every lunchtime. Hope slowly returned to streets that had almost forgotten what it looked like. Amos insisted on one rule. Whenever possible, hire local people first. The project quickly became known as the Commons. Not because it belonged to Amos, because it belonged to everyone. Mabel reopened a cafe inside the renovated community center. A retired school teacher volunteered to tutor struggling children after school. Artists painted colorful murals celebrating the neighborhood's history. And Owen refused charity and only accepted a suit Amos had bought him. "I'll earn my place." So Amos gave him a simple job, sweeping the walkways each morning, greeting visitors, sharing stories with curious children. For the first time in years, Owen had a warm room, a clean bed, fresh clothes, not because someone pitied him, because someone respected him. Months later, the final stage of construction began. Workers prepared to transform the old theater courtyard into a beautiful public garden. The neighborhood gathered to watch. Children laughed as bulldozers rolled into position. The foreman climbed into a large excavator. The machine roared to life. Its steel bucket bit into the cracked stone pavement. Once, twice. Then, clang! The loud metallic sound echoed across the courtyard. The excavator stopped instantly. The operator climbed down. "There's something buried down there." Workers grabbed shovels. Carefully, they began digging by hand, foot by foot, inch by inch, until one of them gasped. "I found something." Everyone moved closer. Slowly, the dirt revealed the edge of a large, rusted metal cylinder. Unlike anything anyone had expected, it had been hidden beneath the old theater for decades. No one spoke. Amos knelt beside it. Owen stood quietly behind him. The workers brushed away the remaining dirt. A heavy corroded clasp held the mysterious cylinder tightly shut. "What do you think is inside?" a child whispered. No one had an answer. Amos picked up an old crowbar. He looked around at the silent crowd. Then, taking a slow breath, he wedged the metal beneath the rusted lid. With one powerful pull, the seal finally broke, and what they saw inside would force an entire town to confront a truth it had buried for more than 30 years. For several long seconds, no one moved. The rusted lid rested on the ground beside the metal cylinder, while every pair of eyes remained fixed on its contents. The afternoon breeze swept across the courtyard, carrying the scent of fresh soil and old memories. Finally, Amos leaned closer. Inside lay dozens of carefully preserved items wrapped in faded cloth. There was a child's silver locket, a theater program from the building's grand opening, old black and white photographs, stacks of yellowed newspapers, and beneath them all, a thick bundle of letters tied together with a weathered blue ribbon. Owen knelt beside him. It's like someone wanted these to survive forever. One of the construction workers carefully lifted the bundle from the cylinder. The ribbon crumbled at the slightest touch. Amos unfolded the first letter. The handwriting was remarkably neat despite the passage of time. At the very top were the words, "If you're reading this, then the truth has finally been found." The crowd grew silent. Even the children stopped whispering. Amos continued reading aloud. "My name is Manuel Ashford. If these letters have survived, then perhaps God has answered the prayer I have repeated every night inside my prison cell. I did not burn the theater. I did not murder anyone. I have been made the sacrifice for men whose money was louder than my voice." A chill spread through the crowd. Several older residents exchanged uneasy glances. One elderly woman covered her mouth with trembling hands. I remember him, she whispered. He always said he was innocent. Amos carefully unfolded the next document. It was a hand-drawn map of the old theater. Certain rooms had been circled in red ink. Arrows pointed toward the basement and backstage storage areas. Beside one of the markings were the words, "Fuel stored here before the fire." Another letter followed, then another. Each one painted a horrifying picture. More than 30 years earlier, Manuel had worked as the theater's maintenance supervisor. One evening, while repairing broken electrical wiring, he accidentally overheard a secret meeting inside the manager's office. Several powerful businessmen were planning to burn the aging theater. Insurance money would pay for the loss. Developers would purchase the land at a fraction of its value. The neighborhood would be cleared for expensive commercial buildings. One name appeared again and again, Richard Ellington, a wealthy developer with powerful political connections. Another name appeared beside it, Chris Voss, a construction contractor hired to carry out the plan. The crowd gasped. Many older residents remembered both men. They owned half this town, someone whispered. Amos continued reading. Manuel had secretly copied financial records. He had written down dates, meeting locations, names of everyone involved. He planned to expose the conspiracy, but someone discovered what he knew. On the night of the fire, Manuel rushed to the theater after seeing smoke rising into the sky. Inside, terrified people screamed as flames spread through the building. Ignoring the danger, Manuel ran back inside. Again and again, pulling frightened children and adults to safety. Then disaster struck. A burning support beam crashed onto the stage. One man died. The conspirators seized the opportunity. Instead of being praised as a hero, Manuel was arrested. The evidence had been planted before investigators even arrived. Witnesses had been bribed. Records had disappeared. Within weeks, Manuel was convicted of arson and manslaughter. He spent the rest of his life insisting he was innocent, and no one believed him, except his family. Tears rolled down Mabel's cheeks. My father knew Manuel, she whispered. He said Manuel was the kindest man he'd ever met. Owen stared at the letters. So all these years. An innocent man carried everyone else's guilt. Amos nodded slowly, and the real criminals walked free. A young reporter who had been covering the neighborhood renovation stepped forward. With shaking hands, she photographed every document before carefully placing them into protective evidence bags. This changes everything, she said. Within an hour, police detectives, historians, city officials, and forensic specialists arrived at the Commons. The courtyard filled with flashing lights. The time capsule was treated as an active crime scene. Each document was photographed. Every fingerprint was preserved. Every photograph was cataloged. Experts confirmed something astonishing. The paper, the ink, even the wax seals. Everything matched materials from more than 3 decades earlier. Nothing appeared to be forged. One detective looked at Amos. This may be one of the most important discoveries in this city's history. As evening fell, television news vans lined the streets. Residents gathered behind police barriers, desperately hoping to learn what had been found. Across the city, the story interrupted regular programming. Breaking news. Historic evidence discovered beneath restored theater. The names Richard Ellington and Chris Voss were spoken on television for the first time in decades. Families who had lived through the tragedy watched in stunned silence. Some cried, others sat motionless, unable to believe the truth might finally be coming to light. Late that night, after everyone had gone home, Owen returned alone to the courtyard. The garden was quiet. Moonlight shone across the freshly turned earth. He looked down at the empty hole where the time capsule had rested for more than 30 years. So much pain, hidden beneath our feet. Amos quietly joined him. Neither man spoke for a long time. Finally, Amos broke the silence. If you hadn't traded that ticket, Owen smiled gently, we would never have dug here. They stood together beneath the stars. Neither realized that the greatest battle was still ahead. Finding the truth was only the beginning. Now they would have to prove it, and there were still people, powerful people, who would do anything to keep the past buried forever. The discovery of the time capsule sent shockwaves across the country. By sunrise the next morning, television crews from neighboring cities had arrived at the Commons. Reporters crowded the sidewalks. Camera crews stood outside the courthouse. Every newspaper carried the same headline. 30-year-old mystery may finally be solved. For many people, it was simply another news story. But for one family, it was the answer to decades of unanswered prayers. Manuel Ashford's younger sister, Eleanor, had grown old, carrying a burden she never deserved. Her once dark hair was now silver. Her hands trembled with age. For more than 30 years, she had visited her brother's grave every Sunday. She always left fresh flowers, and she always whispered the same words, "I still believe you." When a police detective knocked on her door that morning, she feared the worst. Instead, he gently removed his hat. "Mrs. Ashford, we believe your brother was telling the truth." The cloth she was holding slipped from her hands. Tears filled her eyes. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. Then she collapsed into the detective's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "I knew it. I knew he never lied." The city formed a special investigative task force. Boxes of forgotten evidence were pulled from dusty archives. Old police reports were reopened. Thousands of pages of court documents were reviewed once again. This time, nothing would be ignored. Every letter from the time capsule was examined by handwriting experts. Every signature was verified. Every date matched official records. Forensic specialists confirmed the documents had been written more than 30 years earlier. The evidence was genuine. Then the witnesses began to come forward, one after another. An elderly electrician admitted that he had been paid to remain silent after noticing fuel drums inside the theater just days before the fire. "I was young," he confessed through tears. "I had children to feed. I've regretted that decision every day of my life." A retired bookkeeper revealed copies of financial records she had secretly kept after discovering suspicious payments made by Richard Ellington's company. Hidden among the transactions were enormous cash withdrawals. The dates matched Manuel's letters exactly. Another breakthrough came when city archivists searched forgotten storage rooms beneath the old municipal building. Inside dusty filing cabinets, they discovered minutes from the council meetings held before the fire. Entire paragraphs had been blacked out decades earlier. Using modern forensic imaging, investigators recovered the original text. It revealed that Richard Ellington had been aggressively purchasing properties surrounding the theater months before the fire. If the theater disappeared, the land would become extraordinarily valuable. Suddenly, Manuel's story made perfect sense. The investigation gained even more momentum when an elderly man named Arnold Benson contacted the authorities. At 91 years old, Arnold had spent decades living with a terrible secret. Back then, he had worked as a night security guard at the docks. "I saw them," he said quietly. "Richard Ellington, Chris Voss, and two other men. They met the night before the fire. They unloaded several barrels from a truck. I never knew what was inside." His voice broke. "But after the theater burned, I realized exactly what I'd witnessed." He had remained silent for 30 years. Fear had stolen his courage. Now age had given it back. The district attorney announced that Manuel Ashford's conviction would be formally reviewed. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse. Some carried flowers. Others held signs that read, "Justice for Manuel. Truth never dies." Television cameras broadcast every moment live. Inside the courtroom, Eleanor sat quietly in the front row. Clutched tightly in her hands was the last photograph ever taken of her brother. She kissed the picture before placing it gently on the table beside her. Across the room, Owen quietly entered and took a seat near the back. He had never been inside a courtroom before. He looked around at the polished wooden walls, the rows of lawyers, the judge's bench. Then he lowered his head. "If only Manuel could see this," he whispered. Amma, seated beside him, replied softly, "I think somehow he can." Weeks passed as investigators uncovered more evidence than anyone thought possible. Every new discovery strengthened Manuel's innocence. Every new document exposed another layer of corruption. The conspiracy that powerful men had buried beneath lies was finally collapsing. Then came the announcement everyone had been waiting for. The judge scheduled a final hearing. It would determine whether Manuel Ashford's conviction would be erased forever. The courtroom would be filled. News stations across the country prepared to broadcast the decision live. Outside, thousands gathered, hoping history was about to be rewritten. That evening, Owen walked through the peaceful gardens of the Commons. Children laughed where abandoned buildings once stood. Families enjoyed coffee at Mabel's Cafe. Musicians played beneath strings of glowing lights. Life had returned. Amos joined him on a nearby bench. Funny, isn't it? Amos said. What is? If you hadn't been hungry that morning, Owen smiled, none of this would exist. Amos looked toward the courthouse standing proudly in the distance. Tomorrow, we'll find out whether justice has finally caught up with the truth. Neither man slept much that night, because by this time tomorrow, an innocent man's name would either remain stained forever or finally be set free. The courthouse was already surrounded by people before sunrise. Families stood shoulder to shoulder behind the security barriers. News reporters adjusted their cameras. Journalists rehearsed their opening lines. Police officers guided the growing crowd into orderly lines. No one wanted to miss what many were already calling the most important court hearing in the city's history. Inside the courtroom, every seat was filled. Lawyers quietly reviewed their notes. Court officials organized stacks of evidence. The old letters from the time capsule Manuel had buried and added new evidence anytime no one was looking now rested inside clear protective folders. They no longer looked like forgotten scraps of paper. They had become the voice of a man who could no longer speak for himself. Owen quietly entered through the back doors. He wore the same modest suit Amos had bought for him several months earlier. It wasn't expensive, but to Owen it felt like a king's robe. He looked around the courtroom. Just months earlier, he had been sleeping on a wooden bench outside a church. Now he was witnessing history. Amos walked over and sat beside him. "You nervous?" Amos asked. Owen smiled softly. "A little." "So am I." They exchanged a quiet laugh. Then the courtroom doors opened. Everyone stood. The judge entered. The room fell completely silent. You could hear nothing except the ticking of the courtroom clock. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked across the room. "This court has carefully reviewed all newly discovered evidence." He paused. "The handwritten letters, the financial records, the recovered counsel documents, the witness testimonies, and the forensic analysis." Every eye remained fixed on him. The judge continued. "The evidence overwhelmingly proves that Manuel Ashford did not commit the crimes for which he was convicted." A quiet gasp swept across the courtroom. Eleanor clutched her brother's photograph against her chest. Tears streamed down her face. The judge spoke again. "This court hereby vacates the conviction of Manuel Ashford." His gavel struck the bench. Bang! The court further recognizes that Mr. Ashford was the victim of deliberate corruption, fabricated evidence, and prosecutorial misconduct. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if the entire courtroom had forgotten how to breathe. Then Eleanor broke down in tears. She held her brother's photograph high above her head. "You did it, Manuel. I told everyone you were innocent. I never stopped believing." People throughout the courtroom wiped tears from their eyes. Even seasoned reporters lowered their cameras for a moment. Some stories were too powerful to watch through a lens. Outside, the courthouse doors opened. A court official stepped onto the front steps. He smiled before speaking into the microphones. "Manuel Ashford has officially been exonerated." Cheers erupted. Applause echoed through the streets. Strangers hugged one another. Some cried openly. Church bells rang across the neighborhood. For the first time in more than 30 years, the truth had won. Several weeks later, the Commons welcomed hundreds of visitors for a special dedication ceremony. The restored theater stood proudly behind a beautifully landscaped garden. Children laughed where abandoned buildings had once crumbled. Neighbors who had barely spoken for years now greeted each other like old friends. At the center of the garden stood a newly unveiled bronze plaque. It read, "In loving memory of Manuel Ashford, a good man whose truth waited patiently for justice. May we never again allow power to silence innocence." Eleanor gently placed white roses beneath the plaque. "I wish you could see this," she whispered, "but maybe you already can." The crowd stood in respectful silence. Then Amos stepped forward. "I may have won the lottery." He looked around at the smiling faces. "But this," he gestured toward the families, the gardens, the children in the restored buildings. "This is the real prize. Thunderous applause filled the courtyard. Then Amos turned toward Owen. There is one more person who deserves our thanks. Everyone looked at the quiet man standing near the back. Owen looked confused. Me? Amos smiled. If you hadn't chosen kindness over greed, if you hadn't traded that ticket for a sandwich, if you hadn't accepted life with gratitude instead of bitterness, none of us would be standing here today. The crowd began applauding. Soon everyone was on their feet. Owen had never experienced anything like it. His eyes filled with tears, he slowly walked to the front. For several moments, he couldn't speak. Finally, he smiled. I didn't do anything special. You did, someone called from the crowd. Owen shook his head gently. I was just hungry. Soft laughter spread through the audience. Then his expression became thoughtful. People keep asking me whether I regret trading away that lottery ticket. He reached into his coat pocket. Carefully, he unfolded an old, faded sandwich wrapper. He had kept it all this time. The paper was wrinkled, fragile, almost falling apart. I've carried this with me because it reminds me of something. The crowd listened quietly. If I had kept the ticket, I might have become rich. He looked toward Manuel's memorial. But an innocent man would still be remembered as a criminal. He turned toward the playground where children laughed together. This neighborhood might still be abandoned. He looked at Amos, and none of us would have met. A gentle smile crossed his face. So no, I don't regret trading the ticket. I think I made the best bargain of my life. Many in the audience openly wept. Amos embraced Owen. The crowd erupted into applause once again. As the ceremony came to an end, children planted flowers around the memorial, while musicians played softly in the background. The Commons had become more than a restored neighborhood. It had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that even the smallest decision can change countless lives. That evening, Owen returned to the old churchyard, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because he wanted to visit the bench where everything had begun. He gently ran his hand across the worn wood. Then he smiled. Thank you, he whispered. The setting sun bathed the church in golden light as he walked away toward his new home. The old bench remained empty, but its story would never be forgotten, because sometimes the greatest miracles don't begin with millions of dollars. They begin with a hungry man, a simple sandwich, and one selfless choice that changes the lives of people he will never even know. The end. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments. Would you have traded the lottery ticket for a sandwich or taken the chance on becoming rich? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes that even the smallest act of kindness can change the world. We'll see you in the next story.